Thank everybody. Thank you guys all for coming. I think this is going to be a very interesting next hour and a half. Thank you to our hosts here at the Blockchain Institute of Technology. So welcome to everybody. Derek and Steven for this. What a great space. What a really great space. And Bruce, I know Bruce Fenton there. Thank you so much for bringing all these other people here so that we could jabber at them for the next hour and a half. So this is fantastic. Thanks for creating the reason. And of course, thanks to these two gentlemen, Chris Derose and Daniel Krawisz, for coming and having this conversation on my home turf. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming out. So this is, we're playing around with this format. And basically, I guess I'm starting out to let you guys know what it is that you can expect from this evening. We're going to talk about the ideal Bitcoiner. And we're not exactly sure what that means, but I think we all think that all of us are pretty sure that it's important as we've discussed it, and I think that's a weird place to be in, and so I think that it's going to make for a really, really cool conversation. So what we're going to do is we're each going to take a few minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes each, and talk to you about why we think this conversation is important and why we decided to have this. And then we're going to have a trialogue. So we're going to have a little conversation with the three of us, and hopefully by the end of this we can walk out understanding a little bit better what could be in store for us in the future, and maybe some steps that we can take moving forward within this what is now this culture. So I have some prepared remarks, which I rarely do, but it will enable me to keep it short. As you can see, I like to go for a while. So I want to just speak a little bit about why this evening and discussion is important. It's because Bitcoin is important. And of course, everyone here knows that the technology that Satoshi discovered or invented, I'm really not sure which one of those it is special. But where it seems that we're all at a loss is in defining what exactly Bitcoin is. Well, where does it start? Where does it end? And I know there are some real old school Bitcoiners in here. I got my first Bitcoin in 2012, and at that point it was much easier to draw a box around Bitcoin. So I mean, let's be honest. At that time, it was an alternate form of currency, which had just pretty much one primary use case, and that was for purchasing goods on the Silk Road. Yeah. Right? Free Ross. Fast forward to 2018, and we've moved far beyond that. What Bitcoin is, and therefore what it means to be a Bitcoiner, is no longer in the realm of novel tool, and it's now, as made clear even by glancing around this room, in the realm of culture. That we're looking at these posters on the wall, and they mean something to us this quickly, that they carry that sort of emotional value. And it's because Bitcoin is undeniably a culture, I mean, albeit a nascent culture, that this evening is important. But the thing about Bitcoin that's interesting, and so it shouldn't be surprising that we're sitting in the Blockchain Institute of Technology, is that it was destined to be a culture. You know, as defined by Satoshi in the white paper, I mean, we're talking about a protocol, and what's the definition of a protocol? A set of rules governing the exchange or transmission of data between devices. And what's the definition of a culture? The customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. And a custom itself is defined as a traditional and widely accepted way of behaving or doing something. So what am I getting at? Satoshi laid out a set of rules that, when followed, allowed for the most powerful system to date for adjudicating who owns what. What exactly could be owned, and okay, this is an oversimplification here, but just bear with me, began with just the base Bitcoin tokens themselves, yet not even a full decade later, here we are, we're on the last evening of a conference dedicated to taking this rule set and applying it to ownership claims which are currently the exclusive domain of some of the most powerful social institutions in that culture out there. And the title of my last book is Self-Ownership, the Foundation of Property and Morality. The thesis of that book is that the very foundation of society, the foundation of culture, is the rule set governing who owns what. Bitcoin is that rule set. That means although Bitcoin is certainly not the state, it does represent a governance model. And because Bitcoin is changing the very foundation of our social institutions, and it really is changing those institutions, I believe that we, those of us in this room, have responsibility to future generations to pay attention to what is happening. I'm not sure what precisely to do after we have our gaze focused on the cultural and historical significance of this moment. I'm not sure. And I think that's why this conversation matters. And there's no better place to start to take whatever next steps we deem necessary than with the notion of the ideal. And the fact that we have a favorite or preferred blockchain, looks like Monero in this room, is evidence that we have an ideal. I mean, we're judging other rule sets against some internal rubric. It was differing notions of the ideal Bitcoin that created the schism between Bitcoin BTC and Bitcoin Cash. And Bitcoin Cash in November stands a very good chance of being split once more by yet another difference in the ideal. Daniel, Chris, and I, and others, seem to be converging on a belief that the ideal Bitcoiner, so the human, is perhaps, the ideal human in this case, is perhaps not tied to any specific existing set of rules. He or she is not a blind adherent of faith in a particular code base, but instead the ideal Bitcoiner is, I think, that individual who's able, through allegiance to an ideal, as opposed to allegiance to a particular GitHub repo, to evolve and grow this new culture such that it can provide maximum benefit to the maximum number of people. And I know that we differ greatly about what the particular prescription is for living up to that ideal. And we're going to attempt to sort through some of those disagreements tonight, and also take note of the places where we agree. And in the process, I know that that we'll all leave this place better than we came. So thank you guys, and again, thank you guys for being here.
Great.
Thank you.
Next.
Okay, sure. So, is the microphone working?
Yeah, I can turn you up too. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I've been thinking about leadership in Bitcoin for a while, because it started when I was on the Jimmy Song show, and I said that the core developers were terrible leaders, and he said, who would be a good leader? And I said, Captain James T. Kirk from Star Trek. And I was like, oh, what a terrible answer. So since then, I've been trying to think about what the best leader in Bitcoin is like, and then doing that. So that's what happens on my show, Bitcoin Stuff, which you should all watch. And and I think that the ideal Bitcoiner is a leader, and he leads by example, not by telling people what to do, but by being the most imitatable person. So it is in your incentive to figure out who he is and figure out what you need to imitate about him. And he doesn't necessarily tell you. He may not want you to know, because getting in early is better, and it's better if other people don't notice, right? So the ideal Bitcoiner is the most imitatable person, and he's an investor. And that's important because investors are the ones who lose if Bitcoin fails. So they are the ones whose interests are aligned with Bitcoin. They're the group that's aligned with the interests of Bitcoin, and other groups are less perfectly aligned with the interests of Bitcoin. So somewhere along the line, I think people got the idea that the developers are leaders, which I think is a very bad view. The problem with leadership in Bitcoin, well, I already said the most imitatable person doesn't necessarily show you who he is. But good investors look stupid or crazy to most other people. because investment is inherently about predicting the future, and someone who is far-seeing is not necessarily doing something that makes sense to other people. And in fact, if you are far-seeing enough, eventually you have to be doing something that makes no sense to other people, because there's a limit to how far any person can see into the future. And people are easily influenced by ideas about the future that don't necessarily have anything to do with the real future. Because many people are follow the conventional wisdom and believe in what the majority believes, but inherently, whatever the majority believes doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the real future, right? So the ideal Bitcoiner looks stupid or crazy to other people. So I think that's how you identify with him. He should be somebody who doesn't prove that he is either smart or an idiot. If he maintains that ambiguity. He lives by his own convictions, and he's willing to stand alone because it's up to him to ensure that his investment succeeds. There's you can't rely on other people's predictions about the future. You have to predict the future based on what you know that other people don't know. So I started thinking about other characters from stories who are better than James T. Kirk. So my favorite one is Don Quixote, and you should read that book. It's really good. But Don Quixote is Bitcoin, because when I started out in Bitcoin, everybody thought I was crazy, and I felt like I was being gaslighted, because I would try to talk to people about it. They'd be like, "Well, it's just monopoly money," or else they wouldn't say anything. It was like the brain turns off when I talk about it. So Don Quixote is like that. He starts out thinks he's a knight, and he acts like a knight. Everybody thinks that he's crazy, and the book says that he's crazy. But later on, after he does this long enough, people start to be amused by his antics, so they start to play along, and that's Bitcoin. Because the most difficult thing I found about talking to people about Bitcoin was making them think that it's real, right? Because they would say, "Well, the dollar is real, Bitcoin isn't real." But that's what the book is about, right? Because everybody who thinks he's a knight is living in a fantasy. It's just that most knights are living in a shared fantasy, and Don Quixote is living in his own fantasy. So we want to make the fantasy of Bitcoin take over. So Don Quixote, he's my hero, and some other characters that I like. There's Chauncey Gardner from the movie Being There, which you should see. That's very good. And let's see. Tom Bombadil from Lord of the Rings, and another one of my favorites is from an anime. Luffy, the Pirate King from One Piece. Mm-hmm. That show is about 1,000 episodes long now, so I don't know if you want to get into that. But these are all characters who you're not sure if they're really stupid, and they change the culture, and it's not it's not clear whether it's a plan or whether, whether it's accidental. Because even if an investor is successful, you don't know if he's really smart. He could just be lucky, right? So, so Bitcoin is about getting people to behave in a new way and live in a new fantasy. And the way to do that is, it's not, there isn't any, the way to do that is to make a fantasy that other people want to join in on. So that's what happens in these stories. So that is, that's stuff about investment. Oh, so I invented a character called the Emperor of Bitcoin. I've been doing him on the show, and both of my friends wanted to play along because they gave me the high chair. So it's working. And I think this is how Bitcoin politics works. You have to be Don Quixote, be crazy for a while, but if you do it right, other people will want to play along. So I get to be emperor because I thought of it first. So now, as to some specifics about Bitcoin in particular. So my theory about the value of money is that the value comes from the other investors. So I think money is basically a group of investors who are investing in one another. And every form of money is basically a token, and it may be something that has value for other reasons, not because it's money, but not necessarily. And the money is valuable because all the people in a society have agreed to use it. And they are all convinced that everybody else uses this kind of good as money. So they are very self-assured that when they are going to hold it for a while, that it's still going to be valuable later on, because everybody else wants it. Money is the most liquid good. It's the easiest good to get rid of. So I think that the ideal Bitcoiner wants to group with other ideal Bitcoiners. He's willing to stand alone, but he wants to group with other ideal Bitcoiners, because money is a community. That's where the value is. And he is loyal to the other investors, even if they are not ideal Bitcoiners. So that's my idea of the ideal Bitcoiner.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. So I'll back it up a little bit, because for me, it's certain that any discussion of the ideal then gets into a discussion of leadership, and I think that that's productive. But I think that we have to make the case to the public as to why we even need an ideal in the first place. And so I'm going to continue a little bit from what Vin started here. For me, watching Bitcoin morph in many ways, I look back on some of the community.
What is Bitcoin?
Okay, well, okay. So I mean, all of the cryptocurrencies are imaginary goods. So the price chart reflects people's ideas. So if you're...
Go ahead. Keep going.
I agree with you that if the price charts all look the same, that means that people in their minds are not really distinguishing between any of the cryptocurrencies, at least not very much. But ultimately, I think that I think that there should be a Bitcoin tribe, and tribes need to be centered around Genesis blocks. So I was trying to make a Bitcoin tribe when I originally wrote my articles, The Problem with Altcoins, but unfortunately I made the dumbest tribe imaginable, because I didn't explain enough about how to do it, I guess. And they got the idea that the tribe is centered around the developers. It should be around the Genesis block. And that's because the community grows over time through Bitcoin's history. And I think it is the history that it's kind of the history that makes Bitcoin valuable. As a currency, a cryptocurrency with a longer history is it has a more established community built around it. And the most important part of Bitcoin is the UTXO set, because those are the people holding Bitcoin. So that's the community. So if you make a fork that keeps the UTXO set, then it has the most important part of Bitcoin. So I think that there should be one Bitcoin tribe, and it's centered around the Bitcoin Genesis block, and there shouldn't be tribes based around BTC or BCH. These two things should be seen as experiments that are serving the Bitcoin tribe. And I think coins with different Genesis blocks are inherently enemies of one another, and you can't have a stable tribe that's based around coins that have different Genesis blocks. And that's because the best money is the one that we all settle upon. So two cryptocurrencies are in an unstable, are unstable with regard to one another. So eventually, eventually one of any two will win out. But it can take a long time for the people in the market to figure out what really matters. So the market could go on a long time without people really distinguishing between all of the crypto coins.
Can I suggest that, as I hear you talking, I think you're making a case for a shared heritage or a common heritage, and I'm very sympathetic to that. One thing that can be considered is if you start a new Genesis block, but you populated the value of that block with Bitcoin, is that heritage then shared in any capacity, or do you consider that value destroyed and something of a treason has occurred?
You mean, well, I mean, if you have the UTXO set, however you got it, to me that's fine.
So the interesting thing about the UTXO set, I've thought about this a lot. I don't know whether I have any answers, but it seems as if that sacrifice creates sanctity. It just seems that way in this world. There's a lot of philosophy, I think, to support that. I mean, you guys go to your jobs, you work 40 hours a week, you deprive yourself of time with your family, and in taking this great sacrifice, the earnings that you've received in the form of currency has a great importance to you. And I think that's mirrored in many different ways. And that gets really interesting, I think, with Bitcoin, because the proof of work algorithm is very much a sacrifice. And it seems that has trickled down into some level of sanctity in this UTXO pool. What's also very evident to me right now is that I used to think that developers were of the most paramount importance, but there's this open source ethos that every dev agrees to, wherein the value of their work must be shared with the community. So it now makes for their work to be a commoditized product at almost zero cost that everyone gets to benefit from. So then you say, well, what are you buying? You're really not buying the development time. You're buying the sacrifice, or you're buying into the sacrifice that has come before you in some capacity. And I don't know if that helps here or not, but if we're building towards an ideal, it may be that on some abridged level, it's heritage that we value. And I don't know if that's productive or not, and I don't know how we express that further.
Well, I guess the question that I have and what I struggle with is that while this all sounds like this is what it should be, I don't think that most people value Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency for any of these reasons. I think it's right. I think that they should. I think that they definitely should, but I think it's far more interesting to try and figure out what is being valued. And while obviously there should be one Bitcoin tribe, I wish there was one Bitcoin tribe. I think it's pretty clear that there is not one Bitcoin tribe. just by looking at Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and looking at the vitriol. And I think that I would like to hear you guys' thoughts, because as I think about the ideal Bitcoiner, and I look at the toxicity of the community of people who are swirling the closest to all of the blockchains and to that internal culture, which is something that I think even the majority of people who hold UTXOs, even the majority of people who are Bitcoin holders, aren't really privy to the level of toxicity. That what do we say in terms of the ideal behavior? Because Bitcoin has grown, and the value has grown, and the environment has gotten more and more toxic, and I haven't seen that toxicity cutting into the price. Quite the opposite. You know what I mean? And I think that we've all of us through the years have been, less so Daniel. He gets blamed for a lot, but and maybe you in particular, Chris, have. I mean, we've participated in that toxicity.
Certainly. And
have said some things that would probably to the outside world be, the average trolling that goes on is so brutal that I almost feel bad to introduce people into that world, just because it's so incredibly offensive. And if we're going to talk about the ideal, though, how do we balance that with the fact that it does seem that there is a correlation between price and toxicity, that I don't know whether it's correlation, I don't know what's causing what, but I'm not altogether sure that it isn't the toxicity that's causing the price to go up. Because as an imaginary good, I figure the more somebody is concerned with their entire day, spending it either defending a particular blockchain or tearing somebody else down, isn't that an indication of that they truly value it? And the more people that value it and the more people are toxic, doesn't that increase the price? So as we start talking about the ideal Bitcoiner, doesn't that potentially go against everything that we hold sacred about our culture and our civilization right now as to what is positive?
I mean,
speaking to you as a notorious troll.
Right. So, I like that we have multiple Bitcoins now. I didn't at first. It was very shocking, even. But I like it now because, like, and again, I think we've actually succeeded. Like, this entire conversation is because we hit the utopia that we set for ourselves prior, and we've succeeded in the sense that we have these like voluntarist governments online now, and people can choose multiple Bitcoins to be their Bitcoin, and I think they choose it based off their ideal. And like right now, we're throwing out a bunch of ideas, some of which are mutually inconsistent, but it seems as if the solution to that problem then is to embrace some level of core values, no pun intended, with your Bitcoin, and letting
but
that
how
be
do
the
those
baseline.
square with the culture is what I'm asking, right? Because my concern moving forward, right, and why I think this is important is to start. It is important to me that we are paying attention to this, because eventually, if this is going to be world money, some percentage of us are going to have enough financial, enough sort of resources and financial power to actually start taking some of the positions within the state, to actually be able to wield coercive violence. And the thought of the troll army actually being able to lock somebody up, the thought of people who are out there saying, Bcash is a scam, if they actually had the reins of the state, I think there are quite a few of them who might actually be blowing down doors of people who are Bitcoin Cash supporters. And I think that they would be willing to do it.
Bcash genocide is a real problem.
So what I'm asking you guys is, if that, I feel like that might be the ideal Bitcoiner now. How do we deal with that fact?
Okay, well, so I think a very important thing about being an investor is that you have to control yourself and not allow your investments to control you. So one of the things that I've learned about being in Bitcoin is, since Bitcoin is an imaginary good, and since, like, you can think of the market as being like something that is trying to manipulate you and trick you, because it's everybody else's intelligences, and they want to put themselves in the good position, and they want to trick you out of the good position.
Yeah.
So you can think of the market as something that's constantly trying to psych you, right? So you have to have your convictions and not let the market trick you. But it's a lot worse in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is an imaginary good. So the way the market tries to trick you is there's just a lot more mind control than in the regular stock market. So it's a lot worse. And I think that people who, so first of all, I think it's good to be a troll, but you don't need to be toxic. And the reason I think it's good to be a troll is being a troll is a way that you can demonstrate to other people that you are in a good position without proving anything. And I think it's like, how do you convince people that Bitcoin is going to take over the world, right? You can't really do that. They have to conclude that, because there isn't a logical argument that will prove it. If there was, Bitcoin would have already taken over, right? But what you can do is you can communicate that your position in Bitcoin is better than somebody else's position outside of Bitcoin. And you can do this by showing that you can behave in a way that the person outside can't afford to behave. So that's why
I agree with that.
that's why you can be a troll. But I think the people who want to be cast genocide are people who have allowed their investment to mind control them rather than staying in control of themselves. And I think that this behavior is unsustainable, and people who have been controlled by their own investments are going to defeat themselves eventually. And it may take a while, but you have to kind of figure out how to avoid them, but be ready to step in once they've tired themselves out.
Why did you've become less of a troll over time? But well, I mean, is that fair?
Stickier about it too.
Is that fair to say?
Probably. I have a very complicated relationship with trolling because there's like so many definitions.
Can you talk about your
Sure.
evolution? Because I mean,
yeah, definitely. Well, I think that a lot of the anonymity of the space not only had a demographic representation in earlier times that gave people the ability to do and say things that they may not be able to do with their real identity, and that changed the play field. So either you are with the people who have power or you're against them. Both are fine choices. But it seems as if there was a great power that existed for the people who had anonymity, I think, in their favor. That people were, like myself, basically, I'm just a screwball, but most people, they were, I think, part of this camp in, like, let's say 2013, were operating anonymously. Over time, Twitter changed the rules, the playfield changed. And so the strategies that would work when you commanded the troll army doesn't work anymore when half of them are apparently Russian bots and the other half are the other miscreants that got kicked off Twitter. So that was part of it, if I had to be fully honest. So we have to change the rules a bit. I like winning. Like, I really just like winning. And the truth is...
That's the only thing that you like?
It's not the only thing, but it's one of the most fun things in this world is winning. And I recommend it to everybody. And I think it fits into this discussion because, like, we have problems with miscreants, and like we are playing games of cultural imperialism, both in the crypto space and in the real world. We're all promoting memes of, I mean, this is part of the shirt, but we're all promoting memes that are part of our ancestry and a part of our heritage and part of our tribe and part of our values. And I have faith in humanity in so much as we've gotten here before, in a world where the playfield was in fact anarchy. Like people take it for granted that we're in this situation now where the US government is this great centralized entity. But there have been many, many years in human history when there was no such entity, and a lot of these rules were figured out. So I think that for me, when the rules change, it seems like team building with real people rather than fake people has a greater value. And it may be that going forward, that's what we see happening in the Bitcoin space. I don't know. I would assume as much, though, certainly in the realm of the investors that I see now compared to the investors of 2013. Like that's the thing, too, I think, about the ideal. Is if the playfield changes, then you have to change. I think that that's good. People centralize themselves in many ways, and one of the ways they centralize themselves is in falling too deeply for some level of stasis in their identity or in the world. And then rather than taking new information and exercise sovereignty, they huddle together with other individuals who may be of a like, albeit unsustainable mind. And I think we saw that. In Bitcoin Core in many ways. You have people who, rather than taking new information, are now advocating that you pay in Visa and settle, maybe once a month. And that's like very centralized to me. And that's a person in my mind who hasn't brought in the new information of the market, and they're just kind of doubling down on old identities. So I guess in myself, I could have probably kept up the old strategies, but I changed because I think that that's good. We should all probably aspire to win in whatever ways the playfield allows.
So Bitcoin is obviously it is a governance model. I mean, that's what it is. It's a protocol. It's governing communication. That's what gives it value. I think, and we spoke about this last night, that if anything, as we move forward, if we're going to say this is the crypto culture, I've said it's crypto savagery, right? That this is sort of the new emerging culture that's coming from inside of the mother culture, as opposed to previously you'd go out into the world, you'd send your explorers out, they'd encounter savages. Those savages would have something, whether it's agricultural, whether it's some sort of weaponry, whatever, you bring that back in, it would change the culture. I mean, just the fact that the tomato is not native to Italy and the potato is not native to Ireland, right? So but who could imagine Italian food without tomatoes, right? So this is the influence, how deeply the influence of the savage, right? They got that from the savages. So this is the sort of crypto savagery coming up. And if, as it grows, clearly we are going to want it to inhabit spaces that were previously part of the mother culture. And so the idea, for instance, of putting assets on the blockchain, securitizing, having security tokens, tokenizing all of these other things, I really see it as being the first place that I really could see it supplanting is the idea of the judicial system. Right, so potentially the thing that the judicial system is doing the most is saying who owns what, who has title to what, adjudicating, claim disputes, property ownership disputes. That's more than certainly the criminal side. I mean, that's 99% of what any modern judicial system is doing, and potentially what we're talking about is knocking that use case, that application, right out. And I don't know how you knock that out and you don't completely create a new government in and of itself. I mean, Islam was born from the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, that's basically what his job was. He was an adjudicator in the Arab tribal system, and that's why Sharia law and the Islamic judicial system is based. That's basically what it is. You can create a whole. The book of Judges. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Even the Israelites started out with a government of judges. And so if we're talking about, wow, we're going to put the judge on the blockchain, we're going to have the judge be this, are we not initializing a new government? Yeah. And if we're not in it, do we have a responsibility? This is something that I've struggled with myself. I mean, I feel like we're talking about, all of these things are just going to emerge spontaneously. Investors are going to make the right decisions eventually, right? That eventually there's going to be a right choice to make. But things move so fast in crypto, right? Are we really going to have the opportunity if we don't set some standards of, well, this is what this government should be able to do, and this is what this government should not be able to do, if we don't set out some sort of Bill of Rights, if we don't set out some sort of cultural decorum, and if that is something that has to happen about how we treat other people, about are we going to have a conversation about social justice? Like, are we going to have these conversations because they're not happening? Right? Are we going to have conversations about individual liberty within the blockchain space? Are we going to have conversations about race and gender? And because we may still be in that cultural moment when this thing happens.
Yeah, something I would add to that. I think a lot of people came to Bitcoin because they didn't like government, didn't want government, and this was the non-government. And I'm very sympathetic to that because it's a great reason to show up here. And that definitely bootstrapped us to where we're at now. But part of that sort of ideal is like the manifestation of things that we need in this world. And it was very underpants to me because like, step 1 was Bitcoin, step 2 we don't know, step 3 was the utopia where everyone's happy. And we kind of hit the apex of where we can go with that mentality without going to number 2 now. And it's good, it's very, very good. But I think you're right. I think a lot of Bitcoiners probably need to accept that Bitcoin itself is a governance process. It may itself be a government, or at least at some level we need some form of voluntary government that we can opt into. And I think that unless we have some notional level of what citizenry is, we're going to be laden in these crazy judicial decisions over the banes of Bcaching and what it is that, you know, at this lowest layer of muck, civil rights are at some level. And I don't know, I think that if you just put a sign on the door and you say, like, look, this is, Bitcoiners are this way, this way, this way, then you can now build all kinds of judicial process from there.
Who is the legitimate authority in terms of saying how we should be behaving toward one another?
Okay, I have an answer for that.
Right, yeah.
All right. I think Bitcoin is like a big poker game. So anybody who is saying how other people should behave is suspicious, because that is potentially a form of manipulation. So I think that the best way to talk about how people should behave is to lead by example. Because if you're the poker player and you're behaving in a certain way, that means that it's safer for other people to behave in a similar way, right? Because you need to take the risk of whatever the behavior is first, and show that it is beneficial, and then other people will want to imitate you. And I also want to go back to what you were saying about doubling down on their previous identity, because I thought that was interesting, because I think that the way that Bitcoin succeeds is learning how to evolve and discovering what is valuable is an experimental process. So Bitcoin needs to be able to evolve because it needs to more closely approximate whatever is the thing that everybody else in the world will want to buy. And I don't think that there is a lot that we can say about this a priori, so there needs to be experimentation. And Bitcoin itself needs to be able to change its identity, just like you. Well, you didn't change your whole identity. You did change a bit, though.
It's kind of the same identity, frankly.
Yeah, it's way. So potentially, Bitcoin needs to be able to completely change its identity, but I don't think
Into what?
something else. But I don't think it needs to change that much. I'm just saying potentially that shouldn't be off the table.
And are you saying that the Bitcoin culture needs to change its over? Where are we now anyway? I think that's a valid question to say. I think we've all been in it long enough. You guys have been deep into the culture, certainly longer than most. Where is the Bitcoin culture now?
It's right here.
I think a lot of people are I have a mixed relationship with the price, because when the price goes up, everyone's happy, but then nobody does anything because we're all fat. And then, so we're now like starting the hangover, perhaps, of this crazy bubble. You know, we'll see.
We're getting hungry.
We're getting hungry again, and that's where we're at. That's my hope. I mean, the products that I think we need right now are, I mean, liquidity is always like the most important thing in this space for one reason or another. So like it seems to me to be very much needed that I can conduct business with any kind of Bitcoiner or any kind of blockchainer. And services like Shapeshift have been fine, but we're seeing the pressures we would expect to see of such centralized systems. So like, for me, one of the things I think is a little bit maligned in the Bitcoin Cash community is the vitriol towards Lightning Network. Because for me, I don't know that Lightning Network is necessarily what we need at point of sale, but I think that that type of algorithm and layer 2 solution is what we need to swap our UTXOs to facilitate varying forms of trade. Meaning, if I want to pay Bitcoin Cash and the proprietor wants to receive Bitcoin Core or some such thing, that's the kind of product that I think we need right now, so that we can do business indiscriminately with people, but then like store value with our community value, perhaps. I think that would be a wonderful product to have off the bat. And I think from there, then we can have more cultural competition in terms of what Bitcoin is the best Bitcoin. Because like some people that are telling us not to use Bitcoin, I think it's fine. Like, I don't think that's gonna work. Maybe it will. But if it doesn't work, then we should at least be able to do business with them and take the value out of their community and bring it into ours if that's what's appropriate, if it's a failing plan.
Well, it has always been striking to me that we're sitting in this permissionless environment. I've never really known quite what to make of it, that you can't stop anybody from doing a layer 2 solution. Like you can't stop anybody from creating a Lightning Network or a drive chain and using it. You just can't. But yet, all you can do is throw propaganda at it, and yet that is going to fail, and you're going to have egg on your face as soon as one of these layer 2 solutions actually proves itself. I don't think Lightning has necessarily proved itself out. I think every time you're making a bet, but I think it's probably a very bad bet, considering that you can't stop anybody from doing what they want to do on the blockchain, to start throwing propaganda in the off chance that they may actually succeed. It's a terrible bet.
One thing that slightly relates to that, I would say, that kind of complicates the space right now, is that the state does interfere in a lot of what we do by way of regulatory controls on the gateway. So like if I created a new Bitcoin Chris right now, the liquidity would be 0, and that's entirely because of the relationships and the regulations that are required to have any form of standing on the exchanges and to get value into Bitcoin Chris. But yeah, I think that as we progress, that will, the truth I think is that fiat leaks. So once it leaves fiat and enters our world, at that point we have all kinds of options that we can start building from there. The developers are the cornerstone of a lot of progress in this space, and I think that they have a lot of value. Whether the Bitcoin Core devs themselves have as much value as I think we gave them in the earlier years, it might be questionable. I don't know.
Do they have an obligation to play do the developers have an obligation to play a part in moving the culture in a positive direction? Because I don't see developers standing out. I can't really think of a developer that is standing out that I would say, oh, that's a heroic individual.
On the newest.
All many.
So he's somebody who could have.
I would agree.
He could have taken a lot of money, stuffed it right in his pocket, and disappeared. No one ever probably known the wiser. And instead decided to sacrifice for the community by giving this information to us. And so like that would be a heroic effort.
But he's a relatively, what I'm saying is that he's a relatively quiet individual, right? He lets his code do the talking. And I guess the question that I'm asking is, if these developers, if we're going to give, and I agree to a certain extent, and as a developer myself, it's like, if we're going to put developers on pedestals, doesn't that also come with a responsibility to be making some pronouncements towards those who are not developers, to be saying, we're moving this thing forward, and this is the vision that we have for the community, and thus, through that vision that we have for the community, this is the reason why we are implementing this particular pathway with the code, as opposed to just being like, this is the right way to go, and if you don't think that it's the right way to go, you're stupid. Because that's pretty much That's pretty much where it stands on every single blockchain. Don't you think that they have if we're going to say that, the developers are the top class in this culture, that don't you think they have an obligation to be even having conversations like we're having now?
I would say so, yes. Though the programmer mentality is a little different than most people, and it's not any worse or it's not that bad, it's actually very good, but in many ways the skills that make you proficient in talking with people need to be developed, and that comes at consequence to one's programming. And so I don't know, I think that like having a representative for the development team might be the compromise that makes sense there. But it's a little perverse right now because like if you're a developer, why do you develop? And the answer probably is some degree of social standing or social prominence or some degree of social signal that you have achieved by way of your engineering efforts. And I think that what happened in Bitcoin Core is probably that there was an interest in not sharing some of that even. Like if you are a top dog, sharing the glory with others, it's not that it didn't happen or that it wasn't some degree of significant merit-based approach to analysis, but the leadership side, part of it wasn't very forgiving. And so I think we have a lot of, really cronyism even, that developed there. So it may be that, and maybe the developers, one solution to the problem is that if the developers are producing code that everyone can use, then it may just be that you would have devs for hire or pilfer them even for other Bitcoin, and then you can pay them and you can offer them, shower them with some degree of community acceptance. And in doing so, they would be more inclined to compromise. I don't really know what the options are there, but I think it's time we start shaking that tree and see what falls out. Because there's a lot of people who feel like they aren't being compromising or accommodating of the general will. And it's a big problem.
Daniel, you think the investor is the top class, but yet at the same time, the best investor is not going to expose his knowledge because then that would make him a bad investor, right? So if he's not going to expose his knowledge, but yet the ideal Bitcoiner is supposed to follow the ideal investor, but the ideal investor will never expose the knowledge that he has. Like, how can you square that? Because I've had a real problem with that idea.
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the idea is that the ideal investor is, and you've said this to me before, and maybe I misunderstand it, that in order to be the ideal investor, you would have to have knowledge that no one else had.
Okay, so...
But then how do I follow you?
Right.
If I don't know the knowledge you understand the question that I'm asking?
So a prediction market gives everybody the incentive to engage in it. And
okay, good. Explain that.
Because if you do, so hypothetically you can put anything in a prediction market. So, and you can have anything about what makes Bitcoin valuable. So you should just watch my video on the topic. It's called Evolution. But if a prediction market exists and you do have knowledge that other people have, then an investment action potentially exists for every possible piece of knowledge that somebody could have.
We're talking about a betting. It's bets. You're laying bets, right?
Yeah. So for any kind of knowledge that somebody might have, the existence of the prediction market gives them an incentive to engage with it. So different possibilities are going to have different probabilities according to the prices that will exist in the prediction market. And since everybody with knowledge has the incentive to engage with it, the information in the prediction market is the best place for knowledge that could possibly exist.
But your background's in theoretical physics. Isn't the fact that the person is making the bet? Isn't the fact that the bet is made? Doesn't that change the outcome of the future? So like just by me placing a gigantic bet, don't I alter the overall incentives that I might not have had I not placed the bet?
Right, yes. So, so when you have, so I think that the brain works like a prediction market because a neuron is rewarded for correctly predicting what your body is going to do. And when you're a baby, the neurons start out firing randomly, but some of them turn out to have some kind of correlation with your body. That correlation will be rewarded and it will be increased. And so, there are self-fulfilling prophecies that happen in your brain, and as you learn, they organize themselves together so that they're more coherent. And that's how people interact with one another in the prediction market. So I think that people can have a shared idea in the prediction market that causes Bitcoin to change. And I don't see anything wrong with a self-fulfilling prophecy affecting what Bitcoin does. To me, that is Bitcoin developing its own agency.
So Bitcoin has to develop its own agency. There's no legitimate place for a group of individuals or an organization or a consortium to say, this is the direction that this culture should be going in. And if somebody does do that, you think that it's probably they should not be followed? Would you say that? That the only thing to be followed is the investors in the prediction market?
Well, the prediction market is kind of like the ideal Bitcoin because everybody can act like they're making a bet, even if there is not some even if there isn't some general prediction market somewhere, anybody can make a bet. So I think that that is the ideal, but you can also look at anything that actually exists already that looks like a prediction market, right?
Like, for instance?
So, like, I am predicting that I am emperor of Bitcoin. So and I act in a way that would be embarrassing if it turns out that my plan fails, right? But it would look awesome if it succeeds. So I am putting a bet on the success of my plan. See? So
okay.
So that's how people should act. That if they want to say that something is a good idea, you should do something that is a bet on that idea. Yeah.
And Bitcoin's the ultimate chance to do that, really.
Yeah.
Because you could always create a new bet at any given time. You could fork a coin. I mean, we saw it during the ICO. So why then didn't any ICOs really succeed? Because it seems like those were all attempts at Emperor of Bitcoin.
Oh.
Were they not?
Well, I mean, no, I don't think that any. Well, I think that people buying the coins were making a bet that the ICO would succeed, but the people putting on the ICO were not making a bet that the ICO would succeed.
They had no thought, so they didn't. So, okay.
They just get in the game.
Right. Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Another reason I think the ICOs, I mean, this is a bit tangential, but another reason I think that the ICOs have performed poorly, amongst other reasons, but if I wanted, let's say I want to make a bet in Augur right now, like, it's going to take me, best I can tell, 48 hours to even get a token with which to do a bet. And there's a bunch of foreign exchange risk that I would be exposed to because I have to, let's say I'm a new person, I have to create a Coinbase account, I have to get a KYC, AML approved, then I have to go from Coinbase to Binance, then for Binance, I can buy some Augur, rep, and then I can participate in the system, but that takes a while. And I think that that's a major bottleneck in the space for a lot of things. It's kind of an argument for Bitcoin derivatives, quite frankly, because I do think that there's a lot more infrastructure built up and or could be built up more quickly in Bitcoin market over time. But that may be wishful thinking, we shall see. I do think prediction markets on a whole solve a lot of problems in this space. And my hope is that TrueCoin does succeed and gives us a lot of those options. Or Augur at this point even is fine, but there's even some governance issues that are solved, I think, with prediction markets in one capacity or another. Because you can probably ascribe a lot of those risks to that market and see what the investors want in some way.
This is making me think of, last night you said something that struck us, and I think everybody at the table at dinner laughed, because you said something about it not, that the most important thing is that we're all suspicious of the value of Bitcoin. And that's what I feel like a prediction market, and it's an interesting term, but I think it's exactly right, that we're all here a little bit suspicious. I think that's the right term, and I feel like the prediction market is all about suspicion.
Yeah, so, I was talking, well, when I first got into Bitcoin, I tried to convince people that Bitcoin was a good idea, but that didn't work. But later I learned that you can make people suspect that Bitcoin might be real. And the way you do that is not with a logical argument. You do that by showing them that you are in a better position in Bitcoin than outside.
By being that example.
Yeah. And so you act a little bit crazy, because most people can't afford to act crazy. And you make them think you know something that they don't. And if everybody in the world suspected that Bitcoin might be real and just got a little bit, just in case, Bitcoin will have won. So that's all you need to accomplish. So Craig Wright is very good at that. He's a
very suspicious individual.
Yeah,
Let's say that. Maybe I might call him suspect, but.
So Craig Wright is doing kind of a Don Quixote kind of thing, and I think everybody should study what he's doing and learn from it.
Oh, please don't.
You should not just copy him, because then you become his cult member, and he wants that, but you don't want that. But I think that you should learn how to be a cult leader from him.
Ideal Bitcoiner is a cult leader.
Well, he knows how to be a cult leader.
But this isn't that crazy though, because when you like all the language you've been talking about, everything when we look at the Bitcoin crypto community is very like mirror image of religion, right?
Oh, it's
here
religion.
we are, you can go anywhere in the world, show up at a Bitcoin house and feel like you're with your people.
Yeah.
We talk about sacrifice, we talk about splintering of visions of BTC and
Schisms.
BTH and like,
Yeah.
all these sorts of things. So like my question to you guys would be, here we are worshiping this God that we don't know who he is. How do you think the whole community would change if we suddenly found out the identity of Satoshi?
Oh, I know the identity of stuff.
If everyone.
So first of all, I think that Satoshi is the prophet and Bitcoin is the god, because if you read the Iliad, the gods are like shared psychological tendencies. So Aries is the tendency to lose your temper, and if you get mad and beat somebody up, you say, Aries got me. So I think Bitcoin is like that, except it's not an emotion. It is an assignment of amounts to public keys. So, but I think Bitcoin is the god, and I think Bitcoin is a religion. Because people always say Bitcoin is an industry, which I don't think makes any sense. So recently I've concluded it makes much more sense to say that Bitcoin is a religion.
I agree. So you're saying that Satoshi discovered. So at my initial thing, I have not, I tend to believe that Satoshi discovered Bitcoin, rather than Satoshi invented Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin is the God, would you say then that Satoshi discovered or channeled Bitcoin and if he's the prophet?
Well, I mean, I don't think that any prophet ever, channeled a something that's outside of his own mind. So I still say that he invented Bitcoin. But
Is he the Bitcoin or the blockchain?
well, both, yeah.
Because the blockchain existed prior to Satoshi. There's been a blockchain published every month or every week in the New York Times since the 90s.
I think you're debating what the definition of blockchain is, which is like a very long debate.
That's a tough one. And he never called it a blockchain. Satoshi.
I think he did.
Called it
Originally
a
time
Much
chain,
later, he
yeah.
called it a time chain.
Yeah.
initially.
Time
Yeah.
chain.
Yeah.
Would you?
Chris invented or discovered?
I think he invented the proof of work definition of blockchain, and I think that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think he discovered the proof of work blockchain, but I think that he invented Bitcoin. And I say that because like you have to decide how did he discover a 10-minute block time, because that's a fairly arbitrary thing. And I think that a decision had to be made, so he invented that, and rightly so. It was a good decision. The blockchain itself is a fairly complex invention for many reasons, not least of which is the etymology of the word. But I do think that he gets credit probably with that invention. Despite people, changing history in some capacity, it seemed like for many of the early years, blockchain was something that he was credited as having invented. One other point too about your point about the religion of Bitcoin. I'm a big believer in civil religion, which is a sociological concept such that the nation state is a form of religion. And I think that what we're probably seeing more so than Bitcoin as a religion is Bitcoin as a nation. And in that sense, it's going to be faith-based. And you're going to have holidays, you're going to have
Pizza Day. We already have one.
right, yeah, of course, having days, and the Jubilees, having day. America has
Having
Yeah.
Day is Jubilee.
Yeah. America has, Day of the Dead, that's with the Memorial Day. And you find these things, I think, in various cultures. And I don't know that people always know that they're in a religion when they're in one. Sometimes they do, and many times they don't. And I think that we take it for granted that the dollar is a religion. I don't think we know that it is, but it's kind of obvious. You just look at it, it's laden with imagery that's very symbolic and it just speaks of its roots in God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like the other knights in Don Quixote, who all agree that they're knights, and Don Quixote isn't.
So the speculative investment, how does that differ from the normal stock market?
The prediction market?
Yeah, it seems to me to be exactly the same thing.
Well, yeah, every investment is a prediction.
Yeah.
And a prediction market is just a general way of making bets about any idea.
Right. So it's exactly like
Well,
stock.
but it's different because you're speculating in a prediction market versus investing. Right, so investing is.
But he's talking about investors in.
The stock market has a hierarchy of accountability.
I
I don't
don't-
know where you see that
I don't
decentralization.
particularly like the idea of investors in Bitcoin because investment implies you're involved in some income producing asset. I'm investing in
Yeah.
real estate, I'm investing in business, I'm whatever stocks, but this is more of speculating. This is more of like buying precious metals. This is more of like, I'm hoping the price rises, I'm hoping everyone else sees my vision and so I can capitalize on
I have to
it.
totally disagree with that. I like where Daniel said that we're buying our investment, we're valuing it in the other investors.
Yeah, we're buying into other
When
people.
I say like value is subjective, well now I can subjectively value the quality of your subjective judgment in that way.
But I still think it's just
And so
speculating.
that's what I'm investing in, the quality of the other people around me.
You're speculating in their perspective. You're not investing because there's no income that's generated. You're not.
Oh, fair enough,
no
fair enough.
production
I mean,
involved. You're-
technically you're right, but I just don't think it's necessary to use investing in that narrow kind of way. But yeah, yes, if you want to make the distinction between investing and speculating, then Bitcoin is a speculation. I just don't really feel the need to make that distinction.
No, again, you could say like, I know to my level of knowledge, I know this other person's valuable and I am going to invest in them.
Yeah.
You know.
I guess it's a narrow financial difference.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think-
I think actually we're probably at a pretty good point to end us being up here because it sounds like we've stimulated some minds.